All right, we're gonna shift gears here and we're gonna move back to vegetation, and we're gonna have Rachel Kesel talk about plants of One Tam. And Rachel is a conservation management specialist with One Tam, and she leads invasive plant, early detection, and rare plant surveys across the mountain. Thank you, Rachel.
Hey folks, thanks for having me and all these great talks leading up here. I'm gonna share my screen and see if we can get this going. I'm gonna talk to you about the early detection of invasive plants as creating climate resiliency. So it's time to talk about weeds. So we know invasive plants cause ecosystem stress. In fact, the California Biodiversity Initiative and California's Climate Adaptation Plan both instruct us to address weeds now, because this is something we can take action on to strengthen the systems that we have that are facing climate change. But what do we know about invasive plants and climate science? Will increased CO2 mean increased weeds? Will it just increase all plants? Or will other factors like longer droughts reduce weed pressure? Well, like a lot of elements of climate change, it really depends on the species that you're talking about and the place that you're talking about. And so that can get very nuanced. We do have some interesting modeling. Alan and Bradley in 2016 ran some models, and this is much like we've heard a couple times today about rain shifts, where they found that focal species might change. So you might lose some invasive plants, you might get others because of a changing climate. They also found that Mediterranean California may have 7 to 8% fewer weed species by 2050. But I want to emphasize that that's species, not weed impact. They also called out that early detection rapid response is our best hope for managing invasive plants. We know that weeds are a problem on Mount Tam. When we did our peak health report, we made sure to call out where weed stressors were impacting the indicators that we reviewed. And we also are working on weeds on Mount Tam. Before I get to what we're working on, I want to acknowledge that this is an audience that really likes to get involved, and that with the pandemic, we've had fewer opportunities to get involved. I was talking with Janet yesterday, and she let me know that the Marin Audubon Society is actually doing some volunteer work parties, I think, including invasive plant management and other restoration. So that might be an opportunity. I'm going to tell you about problems here, and I know that people are going to want to be able to take action. And then if you are somebody who has a garden, don't plant weeds. And if you have weeds growing in your garden, you can replace them. And I'm just going to talk about one plant that's been giving me, it's been cropping up a lot lately, both seeing it more in gardens and new detections down in San Mateo County. And that's this beautiful licorice plant. And it does look beautiful in a garden, but with its windblown seed, it doesn't stay in the garden. And it does blow out of people's private gardens and up onto landscapes like the west side of Mount Tam. I know that this is kind of a fuzzy picture, but you can see those lighter colored mats are licorice plant growing on those west slopes of Mount Tam. So those are some ways that you might be able to take action. And here is some of what we're doing on Mount Tam through our early detection rapid response program. We have a list of 62 species divided into 2 ranks, and that first rank is 23 species that are new to the mountain or in low distribution, so we think that we can control them well, or they're watch list species that haven't gotten to the mountain yet. And when we put this list together, we did try to take into account the way that systems are changing and may change in the future. And I'm just going to give you one example, which is this Bromus tectorum, also known as cheatgrass. This species had been seen on Mount Tam, but when we were making the list, it wasn't known at that time. But what we did know is that a warming climate will benefit cheatgrass. It is a species that we see a lot over in the Great Basin and actually in warmer parts of California. And we know that as the Bay Area gets warmer, that suitable habitat for this species will increase. And Blumenthal et al. Found that warming trends increase both the seed production of cheatgrass and the seed viability. So we have the species itself on a trajectory of being a better competitor, and Mount Tam having potentially more suitable habitat for this species. And as we made this list, we did try to consider some of those factors in the compilation of the list. We review the list and we'll continue to keep those factors in mind. So we just did a report on the first road and trail survey. It took us 3 years to cover the whole road and trail network. And I'm going to share some of our findings. If you go back into the Q&A, you can find a link to this report if you want to learn more. So we found that priority 1 weed species, those are the ones that are new to the mountain, in low distribution, or not there yet, are less than 1% of the total weed acres on Mount Tam. And that's great news because that means that they're well prioritized and that we have a chance to get a handle on them before they become, say, the next French broom. So we have 61 gross acres, that's the whole landscape that they're distributed across, or 8 net acres. So if you squished all those priority 1 weeds into a corner, they would only cover 8 acres. And our public open space that we work on as Mount Tam, or as One Tam, is about 40,000 acres in that larger 53,000 acre area. So that's pretty good. We have 57% of these acres under management. I want to give Andrea a shout out for saying that managed acres is not success, but in the case of EDRR, I think it is a good metric to take a look at. And even though we don't have 100% of these acres under management, 50% of what isn't managed is just 1 species in 1 watershed, and it is being strategically approached. So we're getting there, is what I'm trying to say. In addition, we have 6 species that remain undetected. They are just watch list species. We have a further 6 species that are 100% under management, meaning that we take care of every patch every year. And then we have a further 3 species that are more than 95% managed, and we will get to that 100% point. So that's taking us up to about 15 species that we have a great grasp on, and there's probably another 8 that we would like to be doing more work on. Some of the species that we're having success on, the butterfly bush, every patch of that has moved on to Mount Tam and has escaped to become wild is under management on Mount Tam. The same with the New Zealand nightshade, which is it's got a pretty little flower and it makes a fruit that birds enjoy, and then they fly off to the mountain and deposit that. Well, we have over 95% of those populations under management. And similarly, this Mexican feather grass, which became really popular in the ornamental trade because of the California drought, well, it too will move out of gardens and into wildlands in some situations. And we found that on the mountain, and 100% of those patches are fully under management. There are others like purple star thistle, which is up on West Ridge Crest along where several of the agency boundaries meet. And One Tam has been really instrumental in making sure that every patch gets handled every year in a way that's more efficient than each agency sending someone out to do their little part, because there actually isn't a lot of it, and it's in a very remote place. So we've had a lot of success in those regards. But what are we doing next? We've got this report, and we're getting together this fall and winter to take a look at some of those gaps that we might need to close, like that additional, those priority ones that haven't been fully managed, and also to refine our landscape scale strategies around the weeds that have been on the mountain for much longer, like French broom, for example. Actually, that one's pretty well prioritized, but there are some where we could put some more thought and effort into. So we're doing that this fall and winter to continue to enhance the way that we manage these weeds across the boundaries of One Tam. And with that, thank you. And the report is on our website. I think my email is down there as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rachel. And I have a question on how can people report invasives that they find in the wild?
There are a couple of ways. If you want us to see it, calflora.org is a great place to put your data. For those 23 weeds that are new to the mountain, we actually run it's called an alert through CalFlora, and we take a look at the information that's being brought into that system within that One Tam area of focus on a regular basis. For the more widespread weeds, we can take a look at it. It's a less frequent basis. And then iNaturalist and CalFlora actually have some cross-talking. So if you put that information into iNaturalist, depending on the grade of the data that goes in, it will eventually be ported, may eventually be ported over to CalFlora, where we can also see it.
Thanks, Rachel. And a couple other questions came in where the right answer is once again CalFlora, which is how can I know if a plant has already been registered as invasive? One last question is it possible that the presence of some non-native species actually make the landscape more resilient in the face of climate change? That's a big question.
It is a big question. I think the place I would point to with that is some of the natural range shifts going on with California plants, where there may be regional shifts of species that are not maybe from a different continent, but also different parts of California. I think that the thing that I look at with invasive plants is the way that our fauna relate to the plants. So we know that a lot of insects have particular mouth parts or digestive enzymes that make them tied to the flora that they evolved around. So I think it's really going back to that base level and that food chain where we have to think about in terms of benefits. That's not to say that you can't look at a single species in a single place and find a benefit to a particular taxa.
Thanks, Rachel. And with that, we're going to move on to the next speaker. And I'm just going to remind folks to keep your eye on the chat because we're pasting links into things like CalFlora, and you can find them there.